Hello and welcome to Nikon Report, your weekly roundup of all the latest Nikon news and all other photographic announcements that we found interesting. It's Konstantin here, and here is
Becky.
We're at number 84. Shall we start with the main dish?
Yes, let's start with the main dish. Let's not do any starters. As some of you will have seen, Nikon announced the 17-28 Z lens a couple of days ago. We actually did a video on it on launch day.
I'm sorry, Becky. I live under the rock, so just quickly explain me what this 17-28 is, and then we're going to discuss the rest of it.
Okay.
The aftermath.
That's right, the aftermath of the release. So it wasn't a camera, as many of us had expected. It is a non-S-line 17-28 f2.8 lens. So much like the 28-75, which is not S-line, but is a 2.8 lens, we've got the same thing in a sort of wide angle general purpose focal length now. We saw the lens in person.
Yes, actually yesterday on a photography show.
In the flesh.
And it was surprisingly very light. The internal zoom was nice. And we actually tried it on the Nikon Z9.
Yes.
Which sounds like a good combination, because once you spend all the money on Z9, you don't have much money left, so you buy 17-28 lens.
Now, it's an interesting one because the price point does sit right between the cheaper offering and the more expensive offering. So for those of you wondering on the price point, we're going to discuss more about that.
We will come back to that,
In just a
definitely.
minute.
So stay with us. Okay, well, when we heard the announcement, I had some thoughts about some Tamron lenses that we've discussed a couple of weeks ago, what Tamron lenses should release. And 17-28 was one of them.
That's right. We did actually speculate on what Tamron lenses we'd like to see in the Z Mount, and the 17-28 was on that list, and we talked about it at length. If you haven't seen that podcast, go and have a look at it.
And surprise, surprise, it looks like a Tamron lens. So here's my evidence. Let's have a look at the lens construction first.
The important bit. So yes, we do have 13 elements in 11 groups in both lenses. Of those elements, we have on the Nikon one, we have a spherical glass, we have a super reedy lens, and we have two extra low dispersion glass elements.
So if actually they call them different things, but actually they are literally the same. So now let's have a look at MTF charts, and they look surprisingly the same. If you look at the wide angle side of things, they look pretty much identical. If you look at the tele side of things, which is 28, which is still wide, but in this case it would be tele, they surprisingly look the same. The weather sealing looks the same. What was interesting in the previous release, which was Z28-75, that Nikon lens has an extra seal. In this case, I've counted them. It seems to me that there's 7 seals in there on both lenses, so they look pretty much the same. Now, when you look at the specifications, the Sony version of Tamron lens is a bit lighter, it's 420 grams, while Nikon version is 450 grams. Both have the same amount of diaphragms, which is 9, and you've got, focusing distance is more or less the same. On a 28mm, the Tamron lens focuses at 26mm, while the Nikon one focuses at 23. So there's a slight difference there, but we're talking about millimeters, so it's not a big difference.
I think that has a lot to do with the distance to the sensor potentially as well, and
Could
the
be.
mount size. I'm sure there's some physics in there that would kind of explain away that.
Absolutely. So if we assume that this is a Tamron lens in the Nikon shell, let's talk about this, because I'm getting really confused, because we've discussed the 28-75 and there was no main third parties in the place at the time, and we thought, okay, well, there's a rumor of Nikon introducing another 5 lenses from Tamron under the Nikon brand. So that was back in the day when 28-75 came out. Now, so a couple of weeks ago, Tamron announced their 70-300 lens, which is their own native lens, so not in the Nikon shell. So we thought, okay, well, maybe Nikon listened to the consumer, and then they decided to let Tamron go free and release their own lenses. Surprise, surprise, this week, we get another announcement from Nikon for 17-28 lens, which is a Tamron lens in the Nikon shell. I'm getting really confused because I don't understand what's the logic behind it.
I think, and this is entirely my opinion, but there's a couple of ways that we can look at this. First of all, Nikon are essentially not spending more money on developing new optical designs and instead purchasing the optical design from Tamron. Like basically buying the glass as it is assembled and then putting it with their own motors in their own casing, This is also why you would get a price difference, etc., etc. So that's one thing to look at. That way they can then invest more money into designing brand new lenses.
I understand this.
Like the ones that we've just seen added to the roadmap, which we'll talk about later. But the second thing is, I wonder if Nikon are going, okay, for the 2.8 glass, which is going to fit a particular type of photographer, it's going to be the semi-pros, not the guys, not the keen amateurs, not the full pros, but the semi-pros who maybe want 2.8 but can't spend $2,000 on a lens, but can spend $1,000 on a lens. Let's do these lenses that way, and then let Tamron do the variable aperture glass, which we won't know until we see more lenses, obviously.
But the question is why they just don't let Tamron to release their own 17-28 without Nikon branding. I mean, a couple of sentiments that I've got from talking to people at photography show, and we did talk to Nikon, we talked to Tamron, we talked to Sigma as well, and we had different approaches to them. And one of the thoughts was that Tamron, for some reason, couldn't make it work under Nikon Z Mount. So physically, there was something to do with the design, and that's why Nikon took over. I personally don't agree with this sentiment. It was there. I personally think that Nikon has some sort of agreement with Tamron for that specific Trinity, and we will talk about the third lens later on. But we look at that and we say, okay, the glass comes from Tamron. Yeah. Everything else comes from Nikon, effectively. So that's what affects your price, effectively. And yes, you get different construction, you get different autofocus motor, different ceilings, and obviously the AF compatibility is going to be a lot superior, and it's also will be a lot more future-proof because it's designed to work with current range and probably the future range. I definitely want to try native Tamron Z7300 to see how autofocus works there.
For sure.
Because that is effectively a Tamron's lens. So I wonder if Nikon gave them permission to use the AF technology or not. So, but we will definitely start to see the difference between something like 28-75 and 75-300 lens.
Yeah, I will be honest, I don't think that Nikon have released anything apart from, the permission to use the mount.
Yeah.
And Tamron have kind of been left to their own devices in that respect. And what my suspicion is that they said, you can produce this lens, and you can produce this lens, and this lens, whatever we see. And that Nikon have gone, we're going to take the 2.8 versions because then we can put them into our own housings, we can put our own silent wave motors. A bit more would be expected of Nikon glass, which says Nikon on it.
All right, here's my tinfoil theory. I think that in order for Tamron to release their own lenses, Nikon said, we're going to release these 3 lenses under our name. And if we do that, then you're allowed to release other lenses.
Potentially. I mean, with all these, this is just speculation and only time will actually tell. But obviously it's had a very interesting, surprisingly positive feedback from our release video that we put out, and also a lot of people reaching out to us and saying, look, I'm really glad that Nikon have produced this 17-28 lens, because it means although I couldn't afford a 14-24 and the 14-30, I don't really like the f4 aperture, this is a really good solution for me because I don't need the 14 end or whatever. So there has been some positive feedback, but there's always going to be questions, particularly when the optical design is basically the same as a Tamron lens, and we want to acknowledge you that we understand your consternation.
So Nikon is not only manufacturer of the lens, because it's Tamron and Nikon are basically both manufacturers, but Nikon is a producer. He gets the talent, and then he promotes it and releases it. That's what it is. Okay, so that's what it is. Okay, let's talk about price a little bit. So Tamron version for Sony mount came out on July 25th, 2019, and it was priced at $999. Okay, it is currently priced in the United States at $799. That's not including tax, which includes instant rebate. So if rebate is not included, it's $899.
Plus tax.
Plus tax. So Nikon version of 17-28 lens cost $1,199. So when people throw around the price, well, this lens costs $850, and why Nikon lens costs, let's say, £1,100 or $1,200, we can't really compare those things. It's easy to say those things, but first of all, Tamron version was out for about 2 years, so the prices went down a little bit. Second of all, it's not basically where you just put your logo on top of the lens. It actually includes its own construction, its own weather sealing, its own autofocus motor, and whatever involved in software to make sure that it works with the company. You also need to look at the market for this particular mount. That's what a lot of people don't think about. You're not going to buy a Tamron version for Sony mount and to put on your Z7 camera. It doesn't work like this. So Obviously, it's an easy comparison. Easy to say, oh, why I pay for this and that. You can call it Nikon tax. I would just suggest you to make your own conclusions, but there's certain factors. So I wouldn't say it's really a one-to-one comparison, in my opinion.
Absolutely. You've also got the fact of like with third-party brand lenses, when new firmware updates come out for cameras, there's usually a delay of compatibility with third-party lenses, whereas if Nikon are producing their own lens, even if the element construction, it belongs to Tamron originally, it's still going to have all of the Nikon mechanics so that you get this kind of seamless move from firmware to firmware. So there is that kind of, as you said, it's future-proofing.
Future-proofing, absolutely. It will work with your current system, it will work with your future system as well. So, of course, I am confused. I still don't understand that particular strategy, and I'm sure I'm not alone.
I'm sure you're not. In the meantime, the lens is here. It is a Nikon lens, and we are going to hopefully get our hands on a sample so that we can take a look at it. Now, interestingly, Nigel Danson was the only UK YouTuber that managed to get hold of a 17-28. It was, in fact, the very same lens that we looked at the photography show on Tuesday. And so he had it for a brief period and then had to hand it over. So we've only got one sample lurking around for those who are wondering why we don't have a video with the physical lens in our hands yet. We will when we get the chance. But he did release a video which says, does Nikon have too many lenses? 17-28 2.8 added to a new Trinity by Nigel Danson. Now, I like the fact that he says to a new Trinity because it implies that we are going to get our longer end 2.8 lens, which I'm very much looking forward to.
We will. Trust me, we will. But in the meantime, we will move to United States where Seth Miranda with Adorama also taken some shots in New York. And then in Australia, Matt Irwin also had lens to try out. So have a look at this. If you like to read more than watch, which is rarity nowadays, DP Review has a hands-on with the lens, and also in UK, amateur photographer also had a play with this. But let's come back to that Trinity. So introducing a Nikon Z 1700 2.8, I can guarantee this is happening. I don't need to think that far. It's just the matter of when. And I don't know anything. It's just going to happen.
Yes. Okay. So we've looked at the roadmap.
Yes.
So we know there's a 70-180 on there.
Yes.
We don't have an aperture yet.
No, but if you go to Tamron website, there's a beautiful shot of the whole Trinity, including 17-28, 28-70, and 70-180 Tamron lenses.
So it's entirely possible that we may see a 70-180 2.8 Tamron glass in Nikon shell with Nikon's AF motors. Very important there because the AF motors in the Nikon Z lineup are faster than anything else.
I just can bet on it personally. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. I don't know anything, but it's just the clues are there.
The proof will be in the pudding. Now,
yes, that was a British Bake Off reference.
It's actually not.
I know.
But why not? I love a bit of Bake Off. Or Great British Baking Show, as they call it in America. Moving on, Nikon have given us an updated roadmap, which we are going to discuss now. For those eagle-eyed viewers out there, you will have seen obviously the 70-180, and we're assuming it's an f2.8, but we also have a new 35mm S-line lens. Deliberation as to whether it will be a 1.2 or 1.4.
What do you think? So again, it's the same deliberation as with 85. So do you think because there's a 51.2 they will go with a whole 1.2 Trinity of primes?
I would absolutely love that, to be honest. That would just make my day.
Even if they are gigantic and weigh a ton.
You know, I love the 51.2. 51.2 on the Z9 was like my ultimate combination during event work.
If you're an average Joe or Jane, how often you're going to carry this lens with you? I mean, when I go shooting, I normally, I shoot primes, so generally. So I normally would take 2 or 3 lenses with me. So normally it would be something like 28 or 35, and then there's going to be something like 50 or something longer. So
sure.
I don't want to carry 35 1.2 and then maybe 50 1.2 and then 85 1.2 on top of this.
I'm a little bit different. I'm a one lens for the whole day kind of person. I will not take multiple lenses with me if I can possibly help it. And so for that reason, the 51.2 is lovely because I can kind of do a bit of everything with it. And I think it's totally worth carrying that extra weight. But that's me. It's not a lens for everyone. The 35, I think it would be far more practical to have a 1.4. But at the same time, we don't have a 51.4. So
yeah, I'm in a position where I understand 1.2 is fantastic for professional photographers, portrait photographers, wedding photographers. It's an amazing lens to have, and you will carry the load because it's just, it's part of your job. I understand this. But for every Joe who is not convinced by 1.8 range, I think there's need to be 1.4 version. Like H5 1.4 is one of my favorite portrait lenses. Well, I love the idea of 1.2. I personally think that the size of H5 14G is just perfect for this type of lens, in my opinion.
You think it should be 1.4?
I personally hope it's going to be 1.4, but I can understand that 1.2 is a bigger statement, and for pros, they definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, the 35 is going to be the go-to for wedding photographers, for event photographers, for theatre photographers. Bear in mind that theatre and dance work in extreme low light, the more aperture you have, the better, quite honestly. You're far enough away that the depth of field honestly doesn't make a huge amount of difference. And the 35-1.4, I have sold to more theatre and low light photographers, performing arts photographers than any other demographic of photography.
At the same time, you're highly unlikely that you'll be shooting fully wide open. You would stop it down a little bit. And obviously, it's nice to have 1.2 instead of 1.4 because you will get an improvement, and it's going to be better than, let's say, 1.4 version at 1.4.
Yeah.
I see that, but at the same time, they can have it as 35-1.4G size.
Yeah.
With 1.2, I'll take it.
Ideal.
That's my only concern, is the size and the weight. It's just 50 is a little bit gigantic.
And the 135S line that we're expecting, again, we don't know if is it going to be a 1.8 or an f2. We've got the only 135 that Nikon had up until recently was the 135 f2 DC, defocus control lens. Lovely lens for film photography. It started to kind of lose its peel a little bit with high resolution digital sensors, but worked beautifully on everything up to a certain point. I think it would be, again, nice to have a 1.8. That might be a massive lens though.
Yeah, if you look at the modern lenses, current modern version would be 135 Sigma art lens, which is 1.8.
Yes.
And it's a bit of a beast as well.
It is. Chunky monkey.
I personally, for this focal distance, I would accept, because then you can get 200 f2 and it's also quite big as well. But
Yes.
The question is, again, I think it's probably going to be 1.8 on this one.
Which would be nice. But let us know what you think. We'd love to know your opinions. What would be a lens for you in the 35 or 135 lengths? What aperture would you be looking for? Is the size and weight as big an issue as Con makes it out to be? Or do you just want all that bokeh like me?
Okay, so we've discussed 70 to 180. I think it's happening. It's just a matter of when, and I think it's going to happen soon. Now, let's look at the lenses that have been already on the roadmap but haven't been released yet. So we've got 24DX lens, which is probably going to be small and light. The 26mm pancake full frame one, that's an odd one because we kind of have 28 pancake as well.
Yeah.
So still puzzled about this one. H5, 1.214, we discussed all this. Now, what I like is the next one, which is 1228. It wasn't a roadmap and it was just a DX lens. And it's ultra-wide angle zoom lens for something like Z30 or Z50 cameras. Now, it is now listed as PZ, which is probably a power zoom.
It is.
So if that's the case, I think it's designed for videographers, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the PZ abbreviation comes from the good old Nikon 1 days, if you remember the Nikon 1. We had a 70 to 300 PZ. We also had a 10 to 100 PZ. And those were specifically designed for that smooth zoom when you're doing video, because sometimes you do need to zoom in and out during video work. So I'd be interested to see what Nikon come up with on this one.
Yeah, 1228 needs to come out as soon as possible, I think, because we are missing that ultra-wide angle side of things on DX Z Mount. So let's move on to the one that you all are craving for. It's a Z200 to 600 6.3.
Presumably 6.3, could be a 5.6, we don't know.
That's true. I mean, between 5.6 and 6.3 is not a big difference, I would say. It probably will be 6.3. You know why? Because they're going to make it a little bit smaller and lighter. Because 200 to 500, it's a bit on a large and heavy size. I mean, it is a nice lens, and a lot of people prefer it over Sigma 150 to 600 lens. Quite a few people told us that at photography show. What do you think? Is that the one that needs to come out as soon as? Because otherwise people will just torch the place.
I think that the 200 to 600 and 1228 are probably the top priorities. At this point. I would love to see the primes. Obviously, we are prime users. That's where it's at for us. But I think those two lenses need to come out sooner rather than later, because they fill a gap that we really have at the moment in the Z range. Last but not least, we have the 600S line. We don't know what aperture it's going to be. It's because we've got the 400 2.8, which, to be honest, is impossible. Deliveries have not come through yet on that one.
Yeah, we'll have some news on that a bit later as well.
But because we've got that lens, that unobtainable lens at the top end, the 600S line, obviously for those pros, really does need to happen. But I don't think that that's a priority for the few people that are going to need it.
Okay, so what do you think needs to come out, but it's not on the roadmap yet?
I think we should have had a 70 to 300. Now that we've got the Tamron one coming out, maybe Nikon have kind of decided to separate themselves from doing those.
It's almost like they missed the point. They could just put a Nikon logo on that one, you know, but...
Well, I'm glad that it's coming out sooner rather than later, and we are supposed to be getting our hands on an early copy of that one to try out.
Definitely looking forward to that.
But the other thing that I think should be on the lens roadmap that isn't, which Tom Hogan actually brought up not that long ago, is a 200mm macro. Because the old faithful AFD lens from the, I think, 90s was when it originally came out, does have demand. It's not been replaced in all those years. And there are a number of macro photographers who really need that working distance.
He had actually a survey recently, and 200 came up quite highly on the list. So it is something for Nikon to consider, that's for sure.
Is there anything on there that you're missing?
1.485 would be nice instead of 1.2, but that's me. Again, I'll take my coat. Personally, I think, you know, tilt and shift lenses, obviously, those are always been forgotten by camera manufacturers. I mean, this type of lens is more of a statement lenses, I would say. They're not really there to be mass-produced and sold.
Sure, but architectural photographers and interior photographers would definitely argue that a tilt shift perspective control lens should be in the lineup.
Yeah,
I think that
and I think they will come. Obviously, what we're looking at right now is there's some gaps that need to be filled. And in terms of this, they're there. So maybe a couple of years down the road, we will see that. You never know. Tell us which lenses you would like Nikon to release, especially the ones that are not on the roadmap.
just because we want to know.
And we will pass it on to the higher-ups.
Will we, though? The higher up.
We don't know anyone higher up there. So.
They don't love us. Next up, some deals for you. So in the US, there is a new savings offer, which is Nikon Z Lens Trade Up event. For the month of September, Nikon USA have started a new promotion where you can trade any working camera or lens and get up to a $200 bonus plus the trade-in value towards the purchase of select Z lenses. Now, that's very, very handy for our Z users over in the USA that watch the channel. Also in the UK, we have one more week of the body promotions for the D850, Z7 II, and Z6 II, where it's an instant save discount off those, nice and straightforward. If you don't know what we're talking about, do head over to our website because all of our offers are on there. We also have incoming offers on other items that we can't talk about yet, but will be live probably by the time you watch this.
Get them while you can. All right, now let's move on to a bit of sad news. Nikon temporarily suspended the orders of 400 2.8 VR lens due to unexpectedly large amount of orders. So the notice about that came out on Nikon Japan website. And basically they said that from 21st of Wednesday, we have decided to temporarily stop accepting orders due to a large demand. So they want to supply those first and then start to resume the production. Now, the interesting thing is that Nikon Rumors reported about this delay back in July, and they said they're doing it, and now it's the second time they're doing it. The problem is the first time they released that statement, they said that Nikon should release a press release, and the press release never came out. So actually, we talked about this. It never happened, so that was a false report. Now it is actually happening. I know that 400 has been delayed for quite some time anyway.
Yeah, this is a thorn in my side, this lens. Obviously, Nikon know about even our huge demand for this lens, and they are well aware that those of you who've pre-ordered one are desperate to get their hands on it. So I assume that this is an effort to try and fulfill those orders as soon as they humanly can.
Yeah.
I will say Nikon have said the back orders list is colossal for this lens and far beyond anything they expected, which is, I mean, it's a good thing because it's not a cheap lens, but also don't be surprised when you bring out a good product. That's my advice.
Well, the importance of this announcement is they suspended the orders. So you can't place an order as a dealer for the lens, but actually the production is not stopped.
Yes.
So the idea is they're producing those lenses, so they're still being supplied. So in small quantities, but they're still there. But what they're trying to do is basically they're trying to mitigate the issue where they're going to get too many orders and they can't supply it for years. So hopefully, if you're on back order, well, stay patient and fingers crossed, hopefully you'll get your lens very, very soon. And obviously, once they will fill those orders and, overall supply kind of eased in, they'll resume the orders for the dealers. So on the bright side, they resumed the orders for several Nikon items. Some of them are very special ones like a BR200.
That's right. And the R1C1 and the SU800, all related products.
To be honest with you, I thought they were discontinued a long time ago.
Yeah, I actually had that thought as well.
I mean, EP5B is an important one.
EP5B is very important. This is a power adapter for cameras that take the ENEL 15 battery. So it's great to know that those orders have resumed, which means they've hopefully caught up with all their back orders now.
I have more fun news for you, Becky.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
Nikon issued a statement on the Snapbridge app for your iPhone and its compatibilities with the newly released iOS 16 and iPad OS 16. What they say is install it at your own risk because we can't guarantee that it's going to work.
To be honest, that's not a surprise. It's very normal for when an operating system is updated, particularly by Android or Apple, that Nikon take a little bit of time to catch up. Most software and app developers actually take a bit of time to catch up to work out what's broken, what needs fixing, and then they'll release an update as soon as they can.
Yeah, they say we'll inform you again once we know. I mean, the good news is we are recording this via Snapbridge. Here we are. Look at those pretty faces. So it is working, and I have iOS 16 installed on my iPhone.
Marvelous. There you go.
Splendid.
Splendid. Right, shall we move on to some third-party news?
Absolutely.
Yes, let's move on to some third-party news. So Voigtlander have announced the new Nocton 40mm 1.2 and macro Apo Ultron D35 f2 for the Nikon Z Mount. We're very excited about these. I think we reported on the rumor last week, the week before. Yeah,
now it's happening. Now it's official, and we got the price and the release date.
So the 35 f2 macro Apo Ultron is an APS-C lens for the Z mount, so perfect for your ZFC, Z50 or Z30. That one is going to be priced at £649 in the UK. And the beauty of it is that with 10 aperture blades, it's going to have lovely bokeh.
Oh, yeah.
The closest focusing distance is 16.3 centimeters.
Becky's salivating right now.
Yeah, that excites me greatly. And the reproduction ratio is 1:2 on this one. And we are looking forward to getting our hands on a sample. We being me.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we love Voigtlander lenses. We love the manual focus glass, which is also made so beautifully. They're beautiful objects just to hold in your hands. I mean, 290 grams is very light. Now, just give you a kind of like 3 different grades of Voigtlander lenses, right? So you got Nocton lens, Nocton line, which kind of more vintagey, more traditional look, and we got 35 Nocton 1.2 for DX format. Then we also have Ultron version, which is one up, still got this kind of vintage rendering to it, but a bit sharper.
Right.
And then the next one up, we've got Apo.
Right.
So in this case, Apo Ultron is effectively combines both of those two things. So I would assume that as long as you don't need 1.2 aperture, this is actually going to be a better lens than f1.2 35DX. And it's also got macro facility.
Yes.
So obviously it's a bit more expensive, but
it's the bee's knees.
It is the bee's knees. So I would definitely recommend to go for that one. And the pictures look fantastic. Now let's move on to a full frame, a 40mm 1.2. That is the lens for me. Some of you may know that I just recently bought F-mount version of 40mm f2 lens, and I'm delighted by it. It's a really, really nice lens to use. Now, if you are a Z user and you want to use it on your digital camera instead of film camera like me, then this is 40mm f1.2. Why 40/35? Well, for me, I prefer a little bit more compressed view, so which is still not 50, but just a little bit more compressed than 35mm, not as wide. And for me, definitely that would be one to consider. And obviously 1.2 aperture should give you this beautiful bokeh.
That's right. Now, the minimum focusing distance on that is 30 centimeters. Again, it has that 10-blade diaphragm, which should be very, very nice for your dreamy bokeh-looking rendering shots, and it weighs approximately 315 grams.
Very light, very light. So it's smaller than 35 f2 Apple that is currently available from Voigtlander. It's not going to be a sharp. Again, it's a Nocton So it's going to give you more vintage look, while the Apple generally gives you more modern look. And definitely the 35 f2 and 50 f2 Apple lenses that Voigtlander has, they're superb. So if you like that particular look, for me 50 is just, it gives that beautiful rendering, then definitely go for Apple. But if you like more traditional lenses and the swirly background, then definitely that 40 would be a better option.
Now, Voigtlander also published a full list of the compatible firmware that you need to have in your camera so that you can use these lenses, which includes all of the models, including the Z30, the Z50, ZFC, and all the full frame models.
And the lens will be available in October. So if you'd like to pre-order one, then go on our website.
Absolutely.
We stock them.
We do. Next up, Profoto have released firmware updates for several of their Nikon-related products. If you need to know what those are, then we will include a link in the description box and in the podcast notes, just for you.
Absolutely. The new firmware includes TTL performance and fixed for the lost energy setting. So if some of you are Profoto users, then definitely do that. Now, let's move on to Weekend Read and Watch.
Yes, we have first up Robert Frank, The Americans by Photo Icons Explained.
Yes, and the second one is Rich Navindon in the American West. It's a new YouTube channel which is called Photo Icons Explained. I've stumbled on it recently and I really enjoyed it. First one talks about the Robert Frank's book, which is called The Americans, and he was part of Magnum agency, which just literally got established, and he drove for about 2-3 years in his car with his family and was taking photographs with his Leica. And when this book was released, it wasn't accepted in a positive way because it showed not the America of dreams and opportunities. It was showing the hardworking Americans and the reality of being American and a lot of things that was happening back in the day, including racism. So in terms of this, really interesting video, and again, the one on Rich Navindon is also fantastic. So I would recommend you, if you haven't seen those videos and you like those videos, definitely do subscribe to that channel. It's doing good work, I would say.
Excellent.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us this week.
Yes, thank you very much for watching and or listening. Please give us a like and a subscribe if you're on YouTube. We are so close to 15,000 subscribers. We would love it if you'd enter the fold, come and join our exclusive club of Nikon enthusiasts.
Absolutely. You know, this podcast is a lot of work. So there's a super thanks button as well. And if you're on the podcast platforms, we do appreciate a nice review. So we're available on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Spotify, and all other beautiful podcast platforms. And if you'd like to find us on the internet, we are on Instagram. A few people have told us we need to go to Vero, which I don't have the time for, but I will at some point do that. TikTok is in the books as well. The Granary.
Snapchat. If you would like to find us on Instagram for the time being, then you can find Con at
Konstantin Kochkin.
Nice. You can find me at Rebecca_Danese, and you can find the shop at Nikon at Grays.
We will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye. Nice.